So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining our mobile health meetup. It's really lovely to see you all here. So I'm Emily Glazer and I'm a design researcher at Control Group and I'll be facilitating the discussion today, which is all about virtual reality and the potential and challenges and ethics around it in the space of healthcare. And we're really delighted to be joined by two really excellent people and speakers around this topic. So we have Isabel, who's here in person, and then Skip, who's in California and will be beaming in shortly through a live stream that we have set up right here. And just a quick intro about the two of them, even though I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about yourself. So Isabel is the founder and CEO of Immersive Rehab, which creates interactive physiotherapy programs that incorporate the effectiveness of physical and neuro rehabilitation. And Skip Rizzo is the Director of Medical Virtual Reality, which is a pretty cool job title, at the USC Institute for Creative Technologies, and he's really a pioneer in the field of VR, primarily using exposure therapy through virtual reality to treat people with PTSD. So the way that this discussion will work is that we'll have about sort of 5-minute intros from Isabel and then from Skip, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion where we'll explore their work and some of the themes that kind of emerge across it, and then we'll open it up to everyone here to ask questions and have a bit of a broader discussion. So whilst we're waiting for Skip to join, I think we'll just start with Isabel. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your work and Immersive Rehab and the kind of projects that you do.
Yeah, so as Emily said, I'm the founder of Immersive Rehab, and so what we create is interactive environments / games in virtual reality to improve physical and neuro rehabilitation. And why did I create this type of company is 7 years ago I had an accident myself that left me completely immobile. It was a work accident, so I had a heavy lamp construction that fell on my head and left me immobile and very there's nothing and I had to go through a long rehab period basically to get back to the person I am today, and going through that long rehab period that often left me frustrated and demotivated in the way rehab was being done. It's very boring if you have to repeat 20 times the same exercise without having really a goal to do it, and also access to rehab initially is quite a lot, but then suddenly you get it less and less, and you still need a lot of rehab, and you're very motivated, but you don't have access to it. So I wanted to change that basically for people in my similar situation going forward. And so as a biomedical engineer myself, I wanted to use technology to do that. And so then when I was looking into different conditions, going from traumatic brain injury to stroke to spinal cord injury patients, where often traumatic brain and spinal cord injury, they're basically very much one, because a lot of people that have spinal cord injury often it's because of an accident where they have a traumatic brain injury as well. So that comes then with physical issues and cognitive issues at the same time. And so what I found was that on average those patients, they gain about 15% of their mobility when they leave the hospital, so there's only a 15% gain. And so there's a big gap of mobility that is not being gained back with current physiotherapy. And so when talking to physiotherapists, occupational therapists, they actually told me that basically we don't have the tools to tap into giving them more of that mobility back. And one process or mechanism that exists that could potentially change that is a concept that is called neuroplasticity. And so there you can actually work on the brain, trick the brain into thinking that you're moving and helping unleash that connection basically between the brain and the function again that has been damaged or disabled because of the damage in the brain, spinal cord injury, for example. And so that is then where virtual reality comes in, because where stroke patients would not be able to move this glass from here to there, would not be able to move like a pen from here to there because they lack fine motor skills, they lack strength. But in VR, we can allow them to engage with actual objects with virtual objects, actual objects, because of the high level of immersion. Your brain is tricked into really thinking that you're moving objects around. And we give them a challenge as well. And so by working on the brain and really tricking it, okay, I'm moving objects around, we can create that connection again between your brain and your arm, because essentially there's nothing wrong with your arm. I often compare it, the Wi-Fi between your brain and your arm has been broken, and we want to reinstall it by using VR. So yeah, that's a bit of an intro.
So sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, you can see how the platform works. It's still a prototype stage on the left. So that is a demo, that's not a patient that is doing it, but you'll see the patient doing it afterwards. It's David. So it's completely immersed, and so I've worked with people who cannot hold the controllers, so we strap them with active hands, so physios use it on a daily basis to actually allow people to hold onto something. And we will also have gloves normally going forward. So you're completely immersed. So if you create this environment like the room you're sitting in today, you actually are completely immersed in it. So you'll be moving objects around. And then you can see David, for example, when he's doing it. Oh yeah, you can restart it again, or yeah. But here, basically the movements, they're based on rotational movements. So it's based on the grasping technique that stroke patients, spinal cord injury patients with upper limb have to do on a daily basis. But what they do now is they don't engage with any objects because they get very frustrated because they cannot move objects around. So the physio asks them just do this movement 20 times, this movement 20 times, this movement 20 times. And they're very bored, they don't want to engage, and they're not motivated. And here, we give them a challenge, so they need to build a tower within a specific time. And people don't think about it. And what we've seen is that engagement with one patient, has gone up like a tenfold, where normally he shuts off after 1 minute, he's in it for 10 minutes. And another patient, he was convinced, he had a stroke, I cannot move my arm. They always have their arm here, I cannot move it that far, I don't want to move it that far. There's this conviction there's fear as well. But within VR, he could perfectly move his arm quite far within a very safe space, because there was this challenge and they weren't thinking about, I see my arm, I can't move it. And so yeah, that was very interesting to see that kind of, and I had it as well when I had my accident. When you have something that has been injured or something, you're always very protective of it, so you don't want to kind of overstretch it or no, maybe I should not move it that far. And so that was kind of really interesting. And this is David. So he's a Paralympic athlete. He was a gold medalist in 2012 for Great Britain in rowing, but he's also a spinal cord injury patient. So he had a spinal tumor in his neck for 3 times already. So he's paralyzed from the waist down, and upper limb was affected like stroke. So you see his arm is affected. But he's incredible to work with, because athletes, you have patients, but then you have athletes, and they just push themselves to another level. And so working with him, he was walking again after 8 weeks, because he pushed himself and he used visual stimulation all the time, and working on kind of recreating those neural pathways in his body to reconnect with his limbs. And and now he still has issues with his upper arm, but what he's doing here is basically grabbing a block and throwing it away. So he's practicing his shoulder movements. So he's doing the same exercises as our building, but doing it in a different manner. And he was in it for 2 hours, non-stop. Because, he did different exercises. So we have a piano exercise as well, which is a cognitive exercise. But he's been, amazing in terms of feedback and so on. So it's been great to work with him.
Great, well thank you for that introduction. Should we see if Skip is here? Excellent. Hi Skip, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to make sure that we get you on the big screen here. So bear with us just a minute. So while we're just adjusting you, Skip, we're here with Isabel as well, who I know you've been in touch with. And Isabel has just given us an introduction of her work and how immersive rehab functions. And it would be great to hear from you just a bit of an introduction of the work that you do, and if you could tell us a little bit about how it actually works in terms of the mechanisms within the brain connecting to the VR itself.
You know what? Hearing is so well. Can you restate the question real quick?
Yes. So Skip, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, giving us a bit of an introduction of how it actually functions as well.
Okay, great. I think I'm going to go without the headphones because I'm getting a bad echo. Okay, so I'm getting horrible. My volume. Maybe that'll help. Okay.
I'll mute to say it.
Okay, just nod.
Yes.
Okay, good. My name is Skip, and I direct the Medical Virtual Reality Lab at USC, University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. And we've been around since around 1996, back when VR was sort of in the nuclear winter phase, after a similar period of excitement and hype in the early 90s as what we have now. Kind of the bottom fell of the technology. The technology wasn't there to deliver on the vision, really, but the vision was fairly sound for applying virtual reality for clinical applications, like what I just saw at the tail end of the last presenter's talk, the use of it in game-based rehabilitation and so on. The vision was sound, we were just hampered by the technology. So what ended up happening was we started this lab. The idea was we were going to try to do whatever was feasible, involve head-mounted displays, if it was desktop VR or stereo projection systems, things like that. And, we managed to hobble along in the 90s working with a system called an Immersidesk, a 3D stereo projection, sort of like a 3D TV. But we were able to use that to do a wide series of visual spatial training and assessment tasks, the tests of mental rotation, depth perception, things like that. And we got a lot of traction out of it, and we started to get a little bit of funding, and we continued in the direction of cognitive assessment and some training. And then going into the 2000s, it became more feasible to track user performance for physical therapy applications, so we started doing that. Then the start of the war, around 2003, we conceptualized the use of VR to be applied as a tool for exposure therapy for PTSD, and that got us in a larger funding climate with the military, and that supported a lot of work that we did during these sort of like lean years when the technology was complex, expensive, not all that usable in a lot of ways. We were able to leverage a lot of funding to do things relating to PTSD, relating to stress management, continued in the cognitive assessment and physical therapy domain. Of course, when the Kinect came out, that made things a heck of a lot easier. And now with the Leap motion sensor, we see a lot of opportunities to do good work at a low cost. And so along the way, all these things kind of progressed to the current point in time where we have essentially 4 labs, one that focuses on psychological function, another one on cognitive, another one on motor function, and the last area that we focus on is virtual humans, use of artificially intelligent virtual human agents for training, medical training, or training somebody on the high end of the autism spectrum to survive a job interview. These are conversational agents that you can have, you can actually engage in a conversation. There's natural language processing that goes on. And so we find, a good bit of value in now that we can build virtual humans that are somewhat credible. They're not just chatbots, and they're not awkward. We actually try to create characters that look more like a person rather than going the route of a, like say, Flash generated cartoon type character. So in a nutshell, long nutshell, that's what our work involves.
Great, thanks so much, Skip. I have a question just to build on something that Isabel was talking about. So she was discussing how the way that immersive rehab works is that it functions through neuroplasticity, and it sort of tricks the brain to connect back to the physical body. Could you explain a bit about the way that the exposure therapy works in terms of how the virtual reality actually sort of tricks the brain, if it does, to heal patients?
Yeah, I would say that with all virtual reality, there is some kind of a suspension of disbelief, or in good VR, there's an emotional engagement that can occur when people interact with these stimuli. And just as in physical therapy, we know that, if people do the physical therapy enough and they do it in a focused manner in the real world, they're going to achieve some benefit. There's going to be change in the brain. Neuroplasticity is pretty much, a foregone conclusion now, unlike 30 years ago when it was sort of a revolutionary idea, actually. And so we know that if people do the exercises, you're gonna have a change in brain function, and hopefully a resultant change in everyday functional activity. Now with PTSD, it works with a different mechanism in the brain, by trying to help a person to confront and process difficult emotional memories, trauma memories, but in a safe environment. And by doing that repeatedly, by immersing somebody in simulations that are or mimic the key features of the trauma, and having the patient narrate their experience and go through it again, but in a safe environment, what you're seeing is, in actual clinical tests, you're seeing reductions in amygdala activation in the area of the brain and the limbic system that's in charge of fight or flight response. You're seeing higher levels of activation with successful treatment in certain areas of the frontal lobe that tend to modulate emotional reactivity. So what happens is, if you talk to any of these patients that have gone through this, they know they're in the clinician's office. They know they're safe. It reacts as if it's the real thing. And this is what you find with even simple phobias. You see people with fear of heights. I mean, you always see the demo of people walking across a plank over a big pit, and even though people are doing this in a demo space or at an exhibition, they know they're on solid ground, but when they look down, those perceptual cues of depth, and if they were to walk off the plank, they're going to drop, are challenging for people. And that's because that emotional center of the brain, the limbic system, reacts to those perceptual stimuli, as threats, as danger, as it's supposed to do, in order to keep you safe. But at another level, you're in a different room. You know you're in a room. You're not on a real plank. And it's the same thing with the PTSD stuff. These folks know that they're safe. They know that they can always take off the headset and catch their breath if it's needed. But the brain reacts in an emotional way, and that's what you want. You want that reaction to occur. You want to, what we call, activate the fear structure, but with no negative consequence. And that by doing that repeatedly, both on a pure behavioral conditioning perspective, you see a reduction in the anxiety response, but also along the way, I think there's a deep cognitive element that a lot of behavioral psychologists don't like to acknowledge, or they think it's messy data. But I think when people have an opportunity to talk about their experience and share their experience, things that they've kept bound up in themselves for, since they've come back from their, I think that helping someone to process that information is part of the cure as well. It's not just simple, animal learning, running rats in a Skinner box or something. It's not that simple, even though hardcore scientists, tend to retreat to that position of parsimonious positions, conditioning and learning of the brain.
Great, thank you. Quite a lot of interesting parallels there, I think, with the work that Isabel's doing. So my next question is for you both, and it's picking up on some of the discussions that I've had with Isabel. And one of the criticisms of virtual reality, which is how it has the potential to be very isolating and to turn people into themselves. And one of the things that I found really interesting when speaking with Isabel about her work is how there's actually quite a social element to the virtual reality therapy. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about how in both of your work with virtual reality, it can actually be social and not isolating. And maybe Isabel, you want to start and then we'll turn over to you, Skip.
Yeah, no, I think, so in my case, I think VR is a very social thing, social tool that patients use with either their physio or their nurses in the hospital or the physicians, because out of that kind of system, it can be a very demotivating experience. And so, but within the system, because the physio is still there to help, it is actually a very fun experience because the physio can follow what the patient is doing on the screen. The physio still guides the patient in the movements that they're doing. And I think 9 out of 10 of the experiences that I've worked with patients, it always ended, or during it, people were always laughing and having a good time, and also the physios themselves, and seeing how the patients are actually engaging with it, and then afterwards, initially as well, prior to kind of figuring out for the patients on how does it work, there's this interaction between them, and then afterwards as well, the engagement of this is how I did, and yeah, the talking about the experience afterwards as well. So I don't see it as a very isolating experience. And also for the patients, the fact that you can go out of this hospital environment and go into an engaging environment and then talk about it afterwards with your carer and so on, and seeing how you progress. I think it can be a very social thing. And so yeah, I don't see VR as an isolating way of doing exercise if you approach the content in a good way and an engaging way. Yeah, so that's kind of, I think that is a very, I mean, just the experience, the example of the patient that had a traumatic brain injury, a spinal cord injury, that is tuning out after 1 minute. He's in it for 10 minutes, and even for the physios, it was very much, and then afterwards they were discussing about the way he was doing the exercises and the movements and so on, and even during the exercises, the interaction between both of them is very interesting to hear in terms of the movements and yeah, how far the patient can reach and so on. So yeah, and I think going forward as well, I think the experiences, when the content is being generated to be a very social experience as well, it will be a very nice thing to be doing, and it will be crucial for adoption as well, to not have it as an antisocial experience to go through.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's definitely, I don't see it as an antisocial thing.
Yeah.
To go through, experience to go through.
And I remember you saying also that it actually had an impact on the physiotherapists in terms of them actually having an improved experience as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, they see how their patients, like most of the patients, stroke patients, spinal cord injury patients, they are very prone to depression, and most of them, they're on antidepressants. So, and one part there is the lack of access, basically. Sometimes on average they have to wait 3 months before they moved into a rehab facility. And so initially people are very motivated, but then your motivation goes down very quickly. And so, and then seeing when they do the normal physio, they really see their patients tuning out and not being motivated and getting annoyed by the way it's being done. But then when they saw their patients inside the environment and really engaging with it, they really, you can see that. I mean, the smiles are on the faces, and just the way that they see the benefits from it. And then often they were like, oh, we could do this as well, and you could maybe make this exercise, because we struggle, for example, to have patients stretch their hands in a very efficient way. But if you make a game where people are actually doing it, it would be really, so yeah, a lot of they got inspired as well by seeing kind of the experience, and part of it as well, I mean, were always in it as well, so they could understand what a patient is actually experiencing. So it's a great. I think it's a great tool, and it's for me it's very much a tool in complement to other physio tools that they have. But currently there's a tool that is missing, and this is a tool that could really fill a big gap and give people mobility back.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse of not having any option.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So Skip, how would you describe the virtual reality work that you do as being social rather than isolating or antisocial?
You know, I'll be honest with you. You know, when I hear people say, "Oh, you know, you put people in these virtual worlds and they're by themselves and it's isolating," what the hell do you think people do when they read a book? Now, how come nobody is critical of people reading books because it's a solitary act? I mean, you know, it's just like it's like people are looking for something to puncture the excitement and enthusiasm about VR. Jesus Christ, I mean, you're going to be able to, in the near future, shared virtual environments are going to be regular and commonplace. I mean, they already exist, but I mean, they'll be more feasible, and people will be able to go on, you know, explorations of worlds and multiplayer things. I mean, it's already there. So if somebody wants to have someone holding their hand in a virtual environment, they'll have that capacity. Now, on the other side of the coin, with I'll give you a quick story about rehab and about the importance of having a shared experience. And we can't cast a blind eye to making VR more social. You know, my little rant is just about, you know, I'm tired of hearing the whining about this. Anyway, it's easy to rant when you're not seeing an audience there, like probably responding like, oh. But anyway, when we first started using the Wii at a rehab clinic, just experimenting with it. When it first came out to see, can we use this kind of interface to do some rehab? And in the clinic, we had a lot of stroke patients, older stroke patients, and this one older lady, we got her going with it. And after, doing playing the games with her and stuff like that, she goes, you know, the biggest problem I have is that I don't like to come over and visit anymore, because, you know, now I'm that kind of funny looking lady with her lip drool, you know, a drop in her one side of her face, and she talked kind of funny and everything. And she thought her younger grandchildren were frightened of her. And then we thought about it and said, well, you know, you like playing this Wii stuff. Why don't you get a Wii yourself and set it up at home and see how that goes? And sure enough, about 3 weeks later, she came back when I was around at the center, and she goes, you know, it worked. My grandkids want to come over now and play with the Wii, because it was brand new and exciting and everything. And, you know, we get to play together, you know? And it's like, now she's doing something that maybe has some rehab potential. The Wii is not the God's gift to physical rehab, but there's some value in it as an activity generator or stimulator. But it also facilitated social interaction with the grandkids, gave them a common purpose. So I've always thought that if, you know, particularly with stroke and TBI, where you've got a social support network, it's good to try to come up with ways that you can make the rehab part of an interactive experience and cooperative or competitive nature. But as far as the work we do in therapy, a lot of the stuff is made to be solitary. You do see a connection with the PTSD stuff with the PTSD patients now, because the clinician is actually constructing the environment. You have 14 base worlds, but the clinician actually adjusts the time of day, how many people are in the world, where an explosion goes up. Patients have said that they feel that their clinician understands their situation better because they participated in creating the virtual environment in which the exposure is taking place, and it's actually seeing what the patient sees as they navigate in the world. So I can see a day where, maybe a clinician pops on a headset and they walk off into a Middle Eastern village or whatever the trauma scene is, and the client can point out different elements of the scene, and the clinician is right there in the world with them. So there may be some value in these kinds of things, to add that. But that's only because it might facilitate engagement with the treatment, not because we're answering, some critic's harebrained idea that VR is socially isolating. I feel strongly about that one.
Yeah, thanks for that, Skip, and we all appreciated the rant, so no harm done. So my next question is sort of to build on that, and again to you both. So if there's this potential with VR to bring together patients and physicians or psychologists, what are other broader potential implications of virtual reality in healthcare, thinking about the future in, say, 20 years' time? What do you think virtual reality itself as a technology will start to change?
One aspect is, the more the technology is evolving now, and the more data collection will be happening as well. The more people will be using it, the more data will be collected. When all headsets will have eye tracking inside, will have facial recognition inside. Basically, who owns, it depends if your headset is linked to a wireless system, which it will be, then who's owning the data, where is the data going? By doing all facial recognition, a lot of data about a person can be gathered, whether it's for career purposes, work purposes, healthcare purposes, insurance purposes. I think there's a lot of issues that are completely non-touched upon today, or very few. There's obviously data privacy, but it's very much still on a level that it's now the digital system that exists, but not in terms of the whole facial recognition and so on going forward. So there I think will be quite a lot of ethical issues that are going to rise, and just regulations that need to be put in place in terms of data, in terms of ownership, in terms of what you want to share and so on. And then another issue, I guess it depends on the content going forward, and because with the high level of immersion, obviously you feel really present. Even in the exercise that you can see the tower building, there's a tower. After two minutes, people believe that there's a table and they want to put things on the table after the experience because of the high level of immersion, and people were only in it for 10 minutes. But if you're in it for quite a long time in the VR experience, I guess it's a bit similar to gaming anyway now. Maybe if you're stuck in the game for a very long time, but then there you're completely immersed, and if it's a very violent game, I don't know. It's questions that will arise going forward in how people will perceive reality and virtual reality. But I guess that's now also applicable in terms of the violent games that exist, and but if you can actually wear a gun and shoot people and it feels very, very real, that is something that probably needs to be considered going forward, and embodiment and so on. And harassment, that's another thing that has already been coming up, where a woman was harassed by a man in the virtual environment, and then obviously the question was raised. Is it actual harassment now? Should it go to? It's something that could go to court, or if you're in a virtual world and something like this happens and you're two avatars, and those are all kind of questions that will kind of be raised in going forward.
So Skip, over to you. I'd love to hear, if you maybe agree or disagree with some of the issues that Isabel raised, and within those, what your vision is for how virtual reality might transform healthcare, say in 20 years from now.
Well, no, I agree. I think Isabel brought up, a good set of issues that are definitely relevant. I think, there's going to be a lot of changes that'll happen. It's a transformative technology. It's a type of media that it changes things dramatically. We've probably had about 6 or 7 media revolutions, going from the printed word to comic books to television, radio, whatever. It's another one of those things, but it's fundamentally beyond that because it's not passive. And so by active embodiment in virtual worlds, you have the potential to do great good, but we also have to understand the potential for harm that can happen for it, not restrictive, not censoring, but we need to pay attention and do research. And I like to say that psychology as a science of human behavior has been around for about 150 years now, studying human behavior and interaction in the real world. Well, we got some catching up to do in terms of studying human behavior and interaction in the virtual world. And we may find things that are totally consistent, which we have in a lot of ways, consistent with how people operate in a real world environment. We also see some differences. So I think that's going to be the real research will get jump started now. Everything now up to this point is prelude. Now that we have low cost systems that are easily accessible, we can do much better research. We're going to be rewriting a lot of the things that we did with more primitive technology over the last 20 years, as now we have much better systems and better capabilities, and I think the research is going to grow, and we'll start to understand the phenomenon around the experience of virtual reality. The other areas where we really need to expand is this sense of touch, haptic feedback. That is, that's the ugly stepchild of the sensory system. It's hard to mimic. It's hard to emulate. Maybe that's where augmented reality applications will rise forward, particularly physical rehab. That's something that's really missing, is that sense of touch in a lot of 3D graphic interaction activities. People try to do mixed reality with a headset and so on. But I think with augmented reality, if I can have standardized pieces of objects that users have to grab and control and move around, take on some endowed trait like a lightsaber, fighting whatever, some game environment where the user is really holding on to things, not just a game controller, but different objects. Now you're bringing more of a sense of touch into the mix. I think that's going to be an area that people are going to really explore a lot in the next 3 to 5, from now to the next few years. And then final area, of course, is the area that I think is where the most excitement is for me anyway right now, and that's with artificially intelligent virtual humans. We can build these virtual worlds pretty credibly. I mean, they look pretty real. That's no longer a big challenge. But now populating those worlds with characters that we can interact with, either for clinical training or clinical treatment or social skills training, educational purposes, wide variety of applications. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of excitement. A lot of work that's been done thus far, but again, it's prelude to what our capabilities are moving forward.
Great. So I think at this stage we might open up to the floor and invite questions from you guys. So does anyone have a question? Don't be shy. Yes, question over here.
Yeah. Did you actually try or consider combining it with neurofeedback and maybe even neurostimulation, whether it's peripheral or central?
Okay. So Skip, just for you, the question was, do you see there being any possibility for neurofeedback and neurostimulation being accompanied with the virtual reality sort of mechanisms that you're currently using? That was the question, right?
More or less.
Yeah.
More or less, okay. Cool. Skip, do you want to go for it first?
Yeah, I mean, people are doing that already, measuring with dry sensor arrays to make it easy, brain-computer interface research, to look at whether you can apply that in treatment. I'm a little nervous sometimes with neurofeedback because a lot of times there's a lot of extensive claims made without sufficient research, but I think there's a lot of value in it. The other area that's coming up now is with the electrical tools that are now becoming commodity products. Like there's one by Fisher Wallace that's coming out, and they're actually building it to fit on a VR headset on a strap, so that you've got these electrical stimulators here, VR environment, and the idea is with this low voltage current to stimulate neurotransmitter production. And I mean, I don't brain science so well, but there is some research showing that using these stimulators, people sleep better, and that may result, when they sleep better, that may result in other symptoms from other conditions resolving, because poor sleep is one of the big issues in mental health. It's not even a question. We're finding out more and more about that. But so I think these are all technologies that can be kind of blended together, but we got to do the science. I used to do biofeedback research in my early days, and I think there's a lot of value in giving that kind of feedback to somebody of a hidden process that's going on in the autonomic nervous system, so that maybe you can have better control over that process and have it be a health-inducing level of control. So I'm not negative on it, but I think we've got a hell of a lot of research to do to determine where the value comes in. And one word of forewarning, we're still trying to get virtual reality as a technology kind of normalized in mental health. Then when you start throwing in brain stimulation along with virtual reality, you've got two, kind of novel, crazy technologies that putting it together. You may have some challenges sometimes with funding agencies with that stuff. If they think you're too far out in the clouds, but that shouldn't deter us from studying these things, exploring, and find ways that they're going to actually provide value for helping people.
And Isabel, neurofeedback or neurostimulation being integrated with immersive rehab's work?
Not yet. I mean, so I've worked with the physios with muscle stimulation.
Yeah.
But we haven't incorporated any kind of brain stimulation inside, as as Skip mentioned, it's as complicated already to really understand the results and how much we can give people back in their mobility, and then also adding on top of that, kind of trying to stimulate the brain in some way using neurostimulation. Maybe going forward, I'm not absolutely not excluding it, but at the moment, step by step. So I'm keeping it open.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the cutting edge of what could be, I suppose, behind your question.
We'll chat about it later.
Yeah, you'll chat about it later. Any other questions?
So I think there's some statistics somewhere that medical practice is about 10 to 15 years behind medical research, which means that by the time the work that Isabel and Skip are doing is sort of making its way into clinical practice, we won't be using Oculus Rifts and Google Daydreams. We'll be using, I don't know, some other completely different technology. I'm just wondering sort of whether Isabel or Skip have views on how to speed up the research and development process to sort of try and match the breakneck speed of consumer technology and just things like VR and mobile and wearable, that sort of side of things.
Isabel, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I think, one issue within medical practice and adoption is money. A lot of healthcare organizations, they struggle to get new technology in, they struggle to have the money in already to just run and operate a healthcare organization with the funding that they have. And I think that goes across, it goes across the UK, it goes across a lot of other countries where they struggle with money. And so then, obviously, it's not on their priority to then add a expensive technology as VR still is today. to have like a mass adoption into their practice and change kind of their conservative way of working. But yeah, going forward, I think one thing is if it is possible and to get the, and it will be possible to get the price of those new technologies down to really like a very low level, so that it's very easy to integrate and also clinicians see the validation, and there's no like that boundary of price to actually have it adopted in their hospitals, practices. That will really speed up the integration, and then obviously the R&D will then be a kind of an iterative process, because as soon as people adopt it, then basically you learn from the people adopting it, and you can actually iterate your product better and better and better, and offer people a better system as well. But now I think, yeah, it's still very much a barrier to get these new technologies into a hospital space because of lack of funding inside those organizations. So yeah.
Good. Did you hear the question? Yeah. Okay. I'll let you answer.
So yeah, the bench to bedside question on why the time it takes to get something actually in medical practice, and I think with VR now, yeah, it's been a long haul, but there is plenty of prototypes out there and now commercial products. I think the key is wide-scale public adoption, and so I mean, really, we already have a lot of the science to document. Number one, we can treat a wide range of clinical disorders safely. We're not hurting people, so we got that one out of the way thus far. We know exposure amplified. We know pain distraction works in VR. There's a number of studies in the physical and cognitive assessment and rehab areas that are showing promising results. So, what you've seen in the last 2 years is more startups in healthcare, VR healthcare, in the last 2 years than in the previous 20. And I think that reflects that the technology is maturing to the point where, we can more rapidly build these things. We can build them in a more astute fashion so that they're flexible and controllable and adjustable to the patient's needs. And they're low cost. I think no matter what you may think of like the Keere VR, the Daydream, in terms of the limitations, that is a groundbreaking thing for healthcare. When a clinician can open up their desk drawer and client a headset, not have to have a computer or some tether, that moves the bar up for adoption in clinical settings. We had done a virtual classroom for testing kids with attention deficit disorder back in early 2000s, and we actually had a test publisher fund it, and we built a real product and had good data to support it. And when we went to a neuropsych conference to try to promote it and to do focus groups, this is 2003 now, and the data was there, but when the question came up, would you be willing to spend at the time $6,000 for a headset and a computer to run this thing? Everybody said, well, why do I really need this? That same application we built to run on, a Keere VR or a Daydream. And so now, any question is eliminated. And so as those kinds of things happen, look at the company Sias out of Spain. They've produced a ton of pretty decent content for exposure therapy that all run on a Keere VR, a mobile-driven headset. So, now that you're having access to that kind of stuff, and those things are getting better. You saw that Vive just announced Vive Standalone. That's going to come out sometime by the end of the year. It's a high-fidelity headset with a lot of processing on board, inside-out tracking, so that you still get your 6 degree of freedom tracking. There's a lot of competition in this space, and that's what's going to promote adoption. That and you know, when it gets to a point when, I like to say, when VR headsets are like toasters, you know, you might not use it every day, but every home has a toaster. Well, when it gets like that with VR headsets, people will not only about it, but they'll come to expect that in certain types of clinical or educational experiences. How come you're not using simulation technology? And so I think we're rapidly moving in that direction now.
Great. So, any other questions from the floor? No. Yes. Okay. Good.
I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Go for it.
when VR is going to be like the toaster, we're going to be quite used to it. Do you think actually that approach is going to change because brain gets kind of numb to the idea of virtual reality? So actually, it won't be trick anymore to think that there's reality.
Yeah, that's why I guess the content needs to kind of to remain engaging and have that high level of immersion. But as long as the content has that high level of immersion and you have variety, your brain will always be tricked into. I mean, it's so crazy that the first time that I tried it, when you're completely immersed in this environment, you can look 360 around you, you can move objects around, and it's so quickly that you kind of wanna believe. So the blocks that we have, they're like very light, spongy, and 50% or 60% of the people doing it afterwards say, oh, they're very light, but they don't have a weight. And so your brain is very much easily tricked into the fact that I'm moving light objects around, there isn't a table, I can lean on it, which has its dangers as well, obviously, for people falling. But no, I think there's no risk. I think when you're doing different types of experiences, they're very immersed, engaging, your brain will kind of be stimulated and be kind of immersed in that environment and be tricked into thinking that, yeah, you're into like an immersion in a virtual environment that is actually like perceived as a real one when you're going through the movements or whatever that you're doing. So yeah, no, obviously, yeah, the future will tell, I guess, but no, I don't see it as a risk, actually, no.
Yeah. Skip, what about you? Do you see the risk that once virtual reality headsets become like toasters, the proverbial toast just doesn't taste as good? So the like virtual reality experiences sort of lose their value and that suspension of belief no longer happens, or do you think we'll continue to be tricked and immersed and engaged and delighted and also healed by it?
I don't think virtual reality is something that is cool only because it's novel. I think it's a functional technology that has a lot of value in creating experiences. Now, you're not going to watch the same movie 100 times, unless it's Road Warrior or something like that, but or Blade Runner. You know, it's the same thing with VR. You know, there's always going to be people generating new content and pushing the boundaries and exploring new things. And I think it'll stay interesting because the functionality of the technology is a media experience. It's driven by content. VR is not cool just because it's a novel and a new experience. I think there's going to be a grammar for creating user experiences that will evolve over the years with wide scale use. And that grammar will drive innovation in narrative and storytelling and types of experiences you can have, the way you become educated. I don't see it getting boring unless humans get more boring, you know.
Hopefully we won't get more boring. Here's hoping for that for the future. Does anyone have any final questions? We probably have time for maybe one more. Yes.
I was really interested to hear the haptic feedback being described as the kind of bad stepchild of the research right now. I wanted to know if there's anything else that you guys are like desperate for in terms of technology that is it mature enough or that you'd like to be developed that can make your applications better, whether it's, I don't know, eye tracking or resolution or whatever it is. Are there other technologies that you're really kind of desperate for?
Yeah, I mean, as Skip mentioned, so I'm really looking forward to this completely standalone headset, so you're not tethered to a computer anymore, but actually they're as powerful as the system that I'm using, so you can really have high resolution rendered environments, 3D environments, where you can do interactions and at a lower cost as well. So that I think is lacking now, where you have the gap between the mobile-based headsets, which are cheaper, but you don't really have the interaction-based one, and then you have the higher-end headsets where you can actually engage with objects in a 3D environment. You're completely immersed, but you're fixed to like this high-end computer that needs to have like this top graphics card. And so yeah, I think in my case and in the case of people that need it, that is something that I'm really waiting for, and that will definitely come, but it's just kind of time. And yeah, haptics is definitely a very important thing within interactions. I mean, it's something that we do on a daily basis. And I've met this company some time ago, as Skip was mentioning, the augmented reality and the haptic feedback, and it's called ultra haptic. So they use ultrasound, so you can actually feel when you're engaging with objects. So for example, if you're in a car, you could turn a knob by kind of feeling where the knob is. And that bringing that into VR as well is very key to make even the immersion even stronger, because when you can engage with other people as well, and you again bring in that social aspect as well, and just the fact of tricking your brain even more, because you can actually feel things. And yeah, so that I think is very much, so yeah, in terms of kind of the way the computer power works at the moment, and kind of making it a standalone headset and haptic feedback would be amazing.
And Skip, any kind of technologies that you are just waiting to be accelerated for you to be able to do everything that you would want to do with virtual reality? What would those technologies be?
Well, definitely less cumbersome head-mounted displays. Something more along the lines of a pair of sunglasses, so that you can do AR on the same system, and maybe certain light field technologies, retinal painting, if you will. Some people would be scared of that, but some of the efforts done in that area have been kind of promising. So, better visual fidelity in that regard, and maybe that'll make it so people are less prone to cyber sickness. I think probably for me, again, the most exciting thing is to build actual humans. So the AI technology, the natural language processing. I mean, one project idea we've been kicking around to try to find funding is a lifelong educational companion that can pop up, and probably an AR character that can pop up anywhere you are, as long as you're wearing these glasses. And the character can be a guide, you can talk to it, you can find information very easily just by asking. And the character stores all this information, not only the information it gathered for you, but the information about you and where you go and what you do. Maybe that's a scary thing for some people, but maybe the character can learn about you and provide you good guidance and advice over time. So, I kind of look ahead to those kinds of things, not just about creating a virtual world, but again, making functional things happen with maybe your own personal, and if anybody ever hacked into it, it'd be like having a digital stroke, something happened to your support agent, somebody wrecked it on you. But, those are sociocultural issues that'll have to be addressed along the way when we have that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so I think unless we have any final questions, I don't think we do. Thank you so much, Skip and Isabel, for joining us. I think it's been a really interesting discussion spanning the range of future possibilities with VR and the potential that it has to heal people now, and how that being brought into clinical practice is actually not so far away. So if you'd all like to join me in thanking Isabel and Skip, thank you so much again for joining us from afar. So, thank you.
Yeah.